energy transition, which is a masterpiece of political intervention. And we start out with the policy, the goals of the Danish government and politicians. We are looking at reductions in the CO2 emissions compared to 1990. So by next year we should have reduced the emissions by between 50 and 54%, and already by 2030 it should be 70%, which is more ambitious than the European Union for some reason. And then by 2050 we should reach 100% reduction. And now the politicians are getting worried because some other countries are also ambitious, like the UK and so on. So maybe we should say no, 100% in 2045, and then minus 7%, minus 10% in 2050. How the minus is something about CO2 collection and shoving it underground or whatever you can think of. So these are the goals. Today we are at 46% reduction. It looked very bad for next year, fulfilling the first target, but then they found some new ways of calculating emissions from agriculture and from forestry, and we were all done. Many people don't believe this, but Denmark already today has 46% of our energy is covered by renewables. That is close to a world record. And that is very impressive, and we must really be ahead of the pack. The problem is, as you can see from this graph, that almost 2/3 of this is biomass. Because we use our straw from agriculture, we use wooden pellets and chips, and we import a lot. And this you can see in the next slide. This is the consumption. The green curve is the consumption of biomass. That is the inland production of biomass. And the yellow curve is the total consumption. So the rest is imports. So basically we are cutting down, or helping the locals cut down their forests, turn them into pellets, bring them to Denmark, and we burn them in our power plants. That is not renewable. That is not something that everybody can do. And what do I mean by that? Well, the fact is that Denmark wants to achieve these climate goals because we want to be a front runner. We want to show the rest of the world how is this done. But now we are showing that you take other people's trees and you burn them. And actually our consumption of biomass is around 3 times what is considered possible for the whole world to use. They say it's 10 gigajoule something per person, and we are using 3 times that amount per year. So we are not a front runner. We are not an example for everybody else. But as we saw from this graph here, you have the wind and you have the solar on top, and that is basically the rest. And let's go into that in detail. This is wind and solar in Denmark. It is production in petajoule, never mind what that is. So you can see the development of solar is a yellow curve at the bottom. Virtually nothing happened before 2010, but then it took off, and the last few years it has been a tremendous increase, and we'll get back to that. For wind, it was more gradual. Denmark was actually one of the first countries in the world where we started putting up small windmills or wind turbines and using them for generating power. And that has been on a steady rise through the years. The development of wind, of course, is onshore and offshore. And here are some select years from 1983, well, that was nothing, until last year, 2023. And you can see now that the total output, or the total capacity of wind turbines, is a little above 7,000 megawatts, of which a little less than 5,000 are onshore wind turbines, and 2,000 are offshore. And if you drive around the Danish countryside, preferably a little away from Copenhagen, then you will see these wind turbines all over the place. We have something like 5,000 put on land, and most of them are fairly small, most of them also getting old, but they're there, and they are sometimes turning, sometimes not. Offshore, the red ones are the existing offshore parks. The red circle here is being established now, and then you have the greens, which are the ones that are coming up, more or less decided. Thor is going to be built, we expect, within a year or two. But of course, this is just regarded as a beginning. There are big plans for a lot more. At the end of this year, there will be a auction for 6,000 megawatts more of offshore wind turbines. We'll get back to that. So, we have 7,000 megawatts of wind power, and the average Danish capacity, yes. And the average consumption in Denmark is 4,000. So we're covered. What's the problem? Who needs more? Well, this is reality. This is 1 week in March, where the solid blue line is the output from the wind turbines. This is last year. And then the dotted line is the consumption. Of course, they never match. We didn't really expect that either. But what you see is that the wind turbines, sometimes they give more than we need, but quite often they give a lot less. And remember that Denmark is, well, it's a small country, but it's still a widespread geographic area, because you have the North Sea, you have the mainland of Jutland, you have the islands, and then you have the Baltic and the island of Bornholm. And all over the place we have wind turbines. So you could say then this is a myth that often prevails, that, oh, if it doesn't blow in one end, it'll blow in the other end, and you will always have power. No, we won't. We will have zero power sometimes, or very close to zero. And this is basically a picture you will also see if you make a similar graph for all of Northern Europe, for instance. It's the same picture, sometimes a lot of wind, sometimes not much. Solar in Denmark. This is the development in capacity. Took off in 2011, and then a gradual increase, and then suddenly in 2021 there was really an increase, because at that time power prices were high, costs for the solar cells was low, and everybody thought, now we have to invest. And you can see in the Danish countryside now, whole fields which used to be used for agriculture, for food production, is now being covered with black plates of solar panels. It culminated in 2022, then in 2023 it was a little lower. And why was that? Well, that's because the energy transmission company in Denmark, Energinet, they suddenly started asking money for hooking up the new solar cell parks to the electric grid. And these solar people said, yeah, but that's more money we have to pay. Yes, it is. Okay, then they were not interested anymore. And this year there will be very little increase actually, which is good, because again, as I said, we have an average consumption of around 4,000 megawatts, and we are already at 3,500 megawatts of solar power. So how does that look? This is the whole year, last year. This is the output from the Danish solar parks, and this is the consumption, the blue one on top. They rarely touch, but as you can see, solar is every day you have something, every night you have nothing. That you cannot avoid. But what is also interesting for Denmark, and even more so for Sweden and Norway, because we are so far north, the sun is very low in wintertime, and the day is very short. So we basically have 3 months in the beginning of the year and the end of the year where they deliver nothing, or close to nothing. We said we have 3,500, and here we are down maybe 200 on average. So solar is not a good idea. And when the politicians tell you that, oh, we just need more, we need to expand 10 times or whatever, it's rubbish, because you will just get all these tops will be much higher, but they will still reach 0 every night. Solar has another problem. This is a very interesting picture from Energinet, the Danish grid company or grid provider. This is one solar park somewhere in Jutland. 158 megawatts is the capacity, and this is the output during just one day. What happened was that it's all located in one field somewhere, I don't know where. But then you had clouds drifting in over. So sometimes the sun was shining, sometimes the sun was not shining, and that is the result. And the consumers, they want something stable. So Energinet would have to crank up some diesel generators and crank them down again and up again and down in order to compensate for these fluctuations. And the more you install, the worse it gets. So, in summary, the total capacity now of renewables is the 3.5, here it's in gigawatts, 3.5 in solar cells, and combined onshore and offshore wind, you get a total installed capacity of 10.7. And 10.7 is 2.5 times what we need. So, what's the problem? Well, this is the output. This is now a summer week where the wind probably was not that much. So you see these daily tops there from the solar panels. But you do have some days where you also have more power, and that's of course because we have wind. But again, you see that the 2.5 times our need in capacity is not nearly enough to supply Denmark with the power that we need. Not nearly enough. And then of course people say, yeah, but then we just need to install more. Yeah, but still, in days like this, even 10 times would just bring you up there. It doesn't make any difference. Now, this of course makes a lot of difficulties for the energy transmission companies, because they have to assure a stable supply. And one of the ways that it's being done is by regulating the prices of the power. So on a day like this, with a lot of power, the price will go low. And other days with low, there will be a high price, because that means that some other producers have to kick in, and maybe they're more expensive. So what we see here are the prices of one month of April this year. And these are the prices. Denmark is split in 2 regions, east and west. And so these are the 2 colors, but they follow each other most of the time. And you can see that the price is sometimes something like more than 1,000 Danish kroner per megawatt hour, which is a lot. But sometimes they're also negative. Which means that the producers of power at this time, for instance, will have to pay money to supply his power. And some people say, yeah, but then that's the market is doing the work for us and everything is fine and dandy. No, it's not. It's not a healthy market where you sometimes have to pay to supply the power that you're producing. Germany is in exactly the same situation, because Germany also has by now approximately 2.5 times the capacity compared to the consumption, the average consumption. And they're in exactly the same situation. And the Germans, some very intelligent Germans, are counting the number of hours with negative prices. And I've done that for Denmark also. Starting in 2010, you can see these are the number of hours each year with negative prices. And you can see back then, until 2016-17, it was limited. It was up to 50 hours. It was typically when the wind turbines were giving a lot of power. Then it started taking off until 2020. There was a dip, and the dip was together with this explosion in energy prices combined with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So their prices in general were very high, and then of course if you had a day web pages and see what will be the price of electricity hour by hour today and tomorrow. And this is basically what keeps Denmark afloat, because as you can see that our own power sources sometimes deliver too much, sometimes too little. The only way we manage is by exporting when we have too much and importing when we have too little. And this you can see here. An example from a week, June, July last year. What you see here is the total consumption is the top of the graph here. Then you have the contributions from solar, that's a yellow. Contributions from wind turbines, that is the green. That is actually the onshore mills, and then you have the offshore wind turbines, is a light gray. The red is other production, which are these biomass powered plants. They are not operating much because this is summer. And then you have the gray, that's the imports. And when we are below the zero line, it's the export. So you can see, like at this time here, our mills, our wind turbines and our solar is producing a lot more than we need. So we need to export a lot. Here, they produce nothing. So we need to import a lot. And actually our exports and imports are up to 75 to 80% of our consumption sometimes. So the only way that this works out at all, thanks to the gentlemen in this room here, the Norwegians and the Swedes, who help us with power when we need it, and the Norwegians especially can also take our excess power and store it in the hydro storages. Without that, it wouldn't work. And now, as I mentioned, Germany is walking down the same path. And the Germans, when they have a problem like that, it's not just 3,000 megawatts. Sometimes it's 15,000 megawatts or 20,000 megawatts, and nobody can take that, or nobody can deliver that. They rely a lot on France. They actually also rely on Norway, because through Denmark the power is then either transported one way or the other way. And now the Norwegians are having enough. They said that they will not renew one of these connection cables, which I think is sensible. Yeah. And the more you build, the worse this will get. And we want to build more, or at least the Danish government wants to build more. These are the future as envisaged by the Danish Energy Agency. And what you can see is that we will end up with some almost 60,000 megawatts of renewable. Half of it solar and the other half is wind. So we only just started. So what will it look like in 2035? Well, that is that's the picture. This is the combined production from solar and wind, and this is the consumption. As I told you before, sometimes, quite often, you will have far too much, but at other times, you will still have nothing. You will still rely on somebody else to help you. And of course, it's a problem. What are we going to do with all these huge surpluses. Well, the energy agency, in Danish, Energistyrelsen, they are full of ideas. They say that in 2035 we will still have a traditional power consumption which is more or less stable. Then we will have these data centers where sensible people in the US say, let's have a nuclear plant to power our data center. But that's not the Danish way. No, we will take care of that. They will expand, but there will still be a huge surplus, and that surplus we are supposed to produce hydrogen. Power to X and hydrogen.
Isn't it very low, 39 terawatt hours? Because in Norway it's 110, I think.
Yeah, you use a lot more power than we do.
You are more people.
Yeah, no, Norway is very high. Yes, no, it's the right figure. Yeah. This is what it looks like. This is the production from the renewables, solar and wind, and this is the consumption. And they never balance, of course. But now, if we subtract one from the other, then we get this picture here. And that is what will be left over for hydrogen production. I don't know, I think some of you probably know something about chemical industry. Chemical industry where you need to have a stable production, stable conditions, stable everything. I mean, how on earth are you going to operate a hydrogen plant or any kind of plant based on that? What is even worse is when they don't just want to make hydrogen, but also want to make like methanol or other fuels. Then we are really talking chemical industry, and that will never work like this. But no politician understands this. That's obvious. They have no clue about what they are going into. They just say, no, we need all these solar cells, we need all these wind turbines, and we need all these hydrogen plants. And here is the plan, right? Hydrogen plants like this, and then a pipeline, the Jutland backbone, a pipeline going all the way here and ready for exporting everything to Germany because we don't need it. Yeah. That is a plan. So all this extra power is supposed to go into these hydrogen plants. Yeah, this is just another wild fantasy of the politicians. The energy islands, where they were supposed to, in the North Sea, they were supposed to make an artificial island. And you can see it's with a small port, small harbor, landing strip and green and everything. And there they will collect the power from a lot of wind turbines, and then it can be brought ashore by DC. I mean, that's the basic idea. But they are also talking about that on the island you could produce hydrogen. So you could make chemical industry in probably the worst environment you can think of. A few meters above sea level, where the air is 50% air, 50% salt. No equipment will survive. And then you have to maintain it and run it and so on. So people have to live out there also. And then also that's very interesting actually, now and again you have these monster waves. Even in a peaceful sea like the North Sea, you can sometimes have these monster waves. What will happen when that hits? But that's a detail. If we go back to the Danish Energy Agency, they are very optimistic on behalf of the new technologies. And this is their predictions. They have issued what they call technology catalogs, which will tell you everything about all kinds of energy. Or every topic related to energy will be in these catalogs, except nuclear power. That's not mentioned. But they also forecast the price of wind from offshore turbines. And as you can see, the blue one is, this is in euro per megawatt hour. So the blue one is as it looks right now. The red one is with more learning, the learning curve, which means that we get wiser, we can do it better, we can do it cheaper, we can do everything. So actually they think that we will end up in 2050, we will end up at around 30 euro per megawatt hour, which is a nice price, yes?
I have a question concerning how this was calculated, what would be the lifetime of the wind turbine? Normally they say 25, 30 years.
They say 25, 30 years,
but
yeah.
the reality is perhaps between 11 to 15, because then the cost to maintain it becomes
Yes.
more than what they get.
Yes, but please, don't talk about reality. We're talking about the Energy Agency. That's something completely different, right? Because what has happened? What has happened is that, for instance, in the UK, they have made new contracts for offshore wind. And there we are talking basically about around 100 euro per megawatt hour. Because the turbines have gotten more expensive. They got a huge price hike in 2022, 23. And also interests are going up. Interest rate is going up, which means that as when you build a wind turbine park, you have to put up all the money up front, and you have to pay interests. So that affects the cost picture hugely. So a lot of projects were cancelled, others were renegotiated and whatnot. And now, realistically, we are talking about this price. And that is forever. It's not just something passing, that's forever. And the contracts have been signed with the UK government. And I'm wondering when the Energy Board will, when they will revise the catalogue, but I doubt they will do it.
I have a question as well.
Yeah.
Maybe you would come back to this, but 80% of the windmill companies in Sweden are not profitable.
Yeah.
What about Denmark?
They are scraping by, but it's difficult. They had to increase the prices dramatically. And then, of course, more business went to the Chinese. But Vestas apparently has quite a good name, so they could continue. It's not as profitable as it used to be, but scraping by. A few more slides. What will the hydrogen cost? Now we're going to produce all this hydrogen. What will it cost? Well, now this is a sad fact, but a fact that you cannot get around. It costs around 50 kilowatt hours to produce 1 kilogram of hydrogen. That is the energy balance and the efficiency of the electrolyzers and so on. So if we say we have to pay 10 cents, euro cents per kilowatt hour, then the power expense will be 5 euro for 1 kilogram. And the other costs which are associated with the hydrogen plant, which is quite big and complex, 3 euro. So the total cost is 8 euro. And this is not a figure made up, because there was actually a contract for difference negotiated in the UK, where they awarded 9.5 euro per kilogram of hydrogen. But today, if you produce hydrogen from natural gas, which is what you normally do, it's only 1.8 euro. So there is a price difference. And now we want to export all our hydrogen at 8 whatever euro per kilogram. We want to export that to Germany. What are the Germans going to do? Well, they are supposed to use it in the heavy industry. Steel, ceramics, cement, whatever. But there, our hydrogen will compete with natural gas. And our hydrogen, the 8 euro per kilogram, you can translate to 240 euro per megawatt hour. Natural gas in Germany, I just looked up the figure, right now is 40 euro. So it is 6 times more expensive. And the same, they're also supposed to use some of the hydrogen in their power plants, because now they're building gas-fired power plants. They're supposed to be converted to hydrogen, and the power will cost 500 euro per megawatt hour, whereas the current prices in Germany have been between 40 and 80. So again, a factor of 5 and 6. Already now, energy costs in Germany are so high that industry is going out of business. They're closing down production lines. BASF and Ludwigshafen closed down 10 production lines because it's too expensive, the energy is too expensive. Now, how on earth are they going to make do with hydrogen like this? And the answer is they're not going to make do. Because what happens is that now many of these projects are being cancelled. This is just some biofuel, but mainly hydrogen power to X projects, which have been either cancelled or put on hold lately, just within the last month or so. And that includes the Jutland backbone. Oh my God. That has now been postponed to at least 2031, or maybe later. Denmark has spent a lot of money on climate ambitions, and we are supposed to, in the coming years, to spend a lot more. And I will not go into detail with these figures. Seen by UK standards, it's small money, but Denmark is a smaller country, so it's actually quite a lot. And it's a lot of money which could be spent on something much, much better. So, in conclusion, we have very ambitious policies. We want this huge expansion of solar and wind, and we want to produce hydrogen, and the politicians are all for it. They agreed we should have 4 times the number of solar cells just before 2030, that is 5 years from now. And they don't have a clue what they're talking about. That's what really worries me, is that whatever you've seen here today, there are not many politicians who have any idea of what's going on in reality. We cannot handle these amounts. It will make no sense. And all the hydrogen they want to make will be so expensive that it'll drive clients, everybody, out of business. But as you can see, reality is maybe setting in now. They have cancelled some of these projects or postponed them. There's also more and more worry about the stability of the electrical system. There's talk about that, oh, maybe we need to retain some of the old fossil fuel plants, gas-fired plants, etc. So I think that there is a development, but the question is still, is it fast enough to avoid the total disaster? So Denmark is now under some kind of stress. And I think that it will end up that either they scale down or they abandon some of these ambitions, because they don't make sense. They never made sense. Thank you.
A very interesting presentation. I just wanted to connect to your last comment about stability of the grid, and that reminds me of about 2-3 years ago.